So hello everyone, welcome to the next edition of the Care Mixtape as part of the web platform Read and Resist, which is a collective and collaborative forum that centres broadly on transformative justice. My co-host Fabienne and I are very kindly joined in a cross-union conversation and also staff-student conversation to chat informally about the proposed period of industrial action across institutions in the UK. We're going to be talking about USS pensions, unsafe workloads, pay, casualisation, and equality failings. We've named this one Spilling the Precarity. So we're going to be talking a lot about the things we mentioned before, but also the all-important getting the vote out. So this will follow how the other interviews we've done before in this series. So we will be very much approaching this as an informal kitchen table. So yeah. Let's begin with some introductions. So if I can begin with introducing, Fabienne, if you want to introduce yourself, and we'll go around as I can see it on my view.
Yep. Hi, I'm Fabienne. I'm a member of the law school at Keele University, and I'm also a member of the committee at Keele UCU.
Yeah, sure. I'm Syahadah. I'm a sabbatical officer at ArtsSU, which is the Uni of the Arts.
Tanya.
Hi, I'm from the School of Law, Department of Criminology at Birkbeck College, and I'm the chair of Birkbeck UCU.
Brilliant. And finally, Mario.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm a colleague of Flick and Fabienne's at the Keele School of Law, and I'm the vice president of Keele UCU.
Brilliant. And you know me as Flick. I am based at Keele University, and I'm a sessional tutor there. And I'm also trying to finish up my PhD. So yeah, okay, right. So let's start it off then. How is everybody doing? How are you doing at the end of this week? Because it's been a long week, right? Well, long is probably, it's not even the right word to describe it. It's been very, very long. How is everybody?
I think
Go Tanya, go.
Well, I was going to say, and this is something that I think we'll talk about a lot, but every week is a long week, you know, at the moment, and has been for a long time. And one of the things, and this week I don't want to romanticize things because this week is hard. There's a lot of people while I'm talking to you back in my branch, and I know in your branch, you know, phoning people, emailing, that kind of thing. But when we started to do it, we began to have those kinds of conversations about, you know, how things might be different, you know, and I know we're going to talk about that, but those relations of care, you know, and thinking about each other and, you know, staff and students together. And so I had, you know, I had some moments of joy in this week that I haven't had for quite a long time, you know, engaging with students and staff in my branch, in my institution, you know, and thinking about the fact that we don't just have to accept things the way they are. So I suppose, you know, to start on a note of lightness, I think, yes, it's been a long week, but it hasn't been as kind of unending, a bleak long week as many of them have been in the past year, I think.
That sounds hopeful.
Yeah.
Thank you for starting us off with that. Mario, how are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine. I think, you know, similar emotions, I guess. Like many colleagues, feeling exhausted already. It's only like week 4 of the semester, and I'm feeling physically exhausted, but yeah, mentally also, you know, very happy to be working with colleagues to campaign and get the vote out. And I always find moments of collective action and mobilization joyful moments, especially after 18 months of very depressing isolation from students and colleagues. It's really great to be back on campus and to be having those conversations face to face and not through a computer screen. My 2 kids are off to Paris with my parents, which is both, you know, a source of anxiety, a source of joy. I'm going on 2 dates with my wife tomorrow night and tonight as well, which is great. But at the same time, because the kids are away, I also can look forward to a weekend of full-time work. So yeah, it's mixed emotions. I mean, I suppose it says something about the state of our sector, that, you know, having 2 kids away means, you know, looking forward to, you know, two full days of more work. Yeah, definitely.
More work.
Yeah,
for sure. And Syahadah, how are you doing? And how maybe some of your peers or people you're working with? What's the atmosphere like?
Long week, yeah, a long few weeks. RCA, Royal College of Art, is already on strike at the moment, so I've been out to their pickets. Yeah, so it's been that. It's been trying to coordinate, like we've got a huge group chat in London to support the UCU strikes in London unis, and like we're trying to plan teach outs and things like that. So yeah, long week, but like it's nice seeing everyone posting their ballot papers and things like that.
Yeah, I feel that. I have got serious FOMO right now, like for seeing people's like ballot pictures, right, that they're posting them. I still haven't got my ballot papers yet, so I can't wait to get my selfie and post that ballot paper. As lame as that sounds, like
surely you got my message this morning.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, no, I did.
I had to put that through because I was called by our membership secretary and it said, your name says that you're on long-term absence and you're not allowed to vote at the moment. I was like, oh, can you please change that? So yeah, so it's nice that everything is coming together. It's nice to feel connected again and that sense of collective purpose. And I really like your angle that you put on it, Tanya, around that care, because it's a form of care, solidarity, and caring for one another. So yeah, so we start with the first question. So the big question is, what for listeners or watchers, viewers, what has led us here? So how have we got here? And can you provide an overview of the core issues, maybe reflecting on a couple of the last periods of industrial action and that kind of underline or underpin the current one? Who'd like to get us going on this question?
I'm happy to provide a very brief summary of what's happening, at least in terms of balloting, if that's helpful. So for the few people watching who might kind of have lived on a different planet for the last couple of weeks, where we've been intensely communicating about this, but so essentially about, I think it's 80,000 plus staff in 130 plus universities are currently being balloted on two separate sets of issues, two separate disputes, but which, as I'm sure we'll get plenty of chance to discuss later on, are intimately connected. So there is, on the one hand, what's called the four fights dispute, and that's a dispute over gender, race, and disability pay gap, ending the scourge of casualisation and the proliferation of job insecurity, tackling our exploding workloads, and addressing the issue of pay. After a decade of real terms pay cuts, the value of our pay since in the last decade has decreased by 20% in real terms. So that's the four fights dispute. And then there is a separate dispute on USS, the University Superannuation Scheme. That's our collective pension schemes for most, though not all, workers in the sector, certainly for most pre-92 universities. The background to this, the value of our pension has already, as things stand, decreased by an average of £240,000 for the average USS member since 2011, after a series of reforms and to the pension structure and cuts to our benefits. And then what's happened as of late is that in order to avoid having to pay a little bit more to address what is in essence an entirely manufactured deficit, we can talk about that in more detail later, but in order to avoid having to pay a bit more, employers have just only recently adopted and are trying to force through a set of new reforms to our pensions that will reduce our guaranteed income in retirement by further 35%. And just by bit of background so that people understand that, because it's an important point, all of this happens in violation of a commitment that employers gave us in 2018 after the last round of industrial action. We had a very sustained period of very large-scale industrial action. I think we definitely had the upper hand, and the employers came and said, well, hold on a minute. Let's pause everything, set up a joint expert panel, independent pension experts. There seems to be a disagreement about how we should value the scheme and how we should calculate the liabilities and the assets of the scheme. Let's get those experts together. And if you agree to pause the strike, we commit to upholding the recommendations of the joint expert panel. The joint expert panel, in a nutshell, vindicated UCU's position, said that the valuation was flawed, that the cuts were unnecessary and unjustified, And all of that has now gone through the window. Employers have completely reneged on their promise to uphold the findings of the joint expert panel. Ballots open this Monday, they close on November the 4th.
Yeah, thank you. That was
that was excellent and very succinct. I think just to follow on from that, because Mario mentioned previous disputes and you talked about it too. I think it's really important to say both of these disputes have been going for a very long time. And the conditions that are causing these disputes have been going for a very long time. So I'm originally Australian, so I've only worked in this country in the past decade. And, since I've worked here, our pay in real terms has gone down by almost 20%. I've already lost a significant amount of my pension. If the proposed cuts go through this time, I will literally no longer be able to afford to live in the City of London on what I will be paid in retirement. And by no longer afford, I don't even mean live a good life. I mean, what I will be paid from the pension will not pay my rent. And that has already been eroded. In terms of casualisation, when I came here, the sector was heavily casualised. It's far more so now. The pay gaps that we see around equalities, particularly around race and disability, have gotten worse. The hours people are working are longer. And so, in one sense, we talk about the pay dispute, but one of the things that we've tried to start talking about a lot in my branch is actually we're talking about a dispute about unpaid work. And the amount of unpaid work that people are doing in universities is increasing exponentially all the time. And one of the people this affects the most is casualised staff and junior staff, because they are literally expected to work for free. Casual contracts do not pay people for the amount of work they're expected to do. When permanent staff work well 10, 20 hours over what they're paid, they're also working for free. When they take away a pension that was told to you at the beginning of when you started working that was deferred pay, they are retrospectively making you work for free. The entire career that you've had, and as you go on, you work, not only for your pay now, but for your pay in retirement. And so that's another thing. I mean, a lot of this is about lack of pay, and it's also about who is expected to do the most amount of unpaid work. And that's why the equalities dimensions are really important, and also why the dimensions around casualisation are really key, because there are people, going through their PhDs now who may not ever have, if things continue in the direction that they're going, a realistic chance of a permanent full-time contract. People continue along the way they're going. So I think it's, we haven't just decided to strike out of the blue. We have a set of unresolved disputes that have been going on for years, and an erosion of conditions that have been going on for years. And I know we're going to talk about students as well, but, our sector is in crisis, and I think Mario mentioned before kind of health and mental health, people, especially in the last year when our members talk to us, people start to cry. They say, I cannot work another year like the one that I have just worked. And we can't teach students the way that we want to under those conditions. We can't support students the way that we want to under those conditions. The sector is running off unpaid work. It's running off unhealthy amounts of work. The sector is sick and it is in crisis. And so I think, I know we're going to come to this. Sorry, I didn't realize how fired up I was about this. I've been doing Get the Vote Out all week. But, there's a lot going around from different VCs. This is the wrong time. How can you do this post-COVID? How can they do this to us after the year that we've just had? How can they do this to students, to turn around the year that we've had, the year that staff have put in, that students have put in, force through these cuts, thinking that because we're so exhausted from the year that we've just had, thinking that because we know what our students have been through, and many of us have fought with our own institutions, around the rights that they give to students, around getting them to actually help and support students in this time. And then they want to turn around to us and say, oh, but how could you possibly go on strike? And so I think one of the things, and I know Mario wants to talk about marketisation, but we need to talk about the violence of the status quo. This isn't a situation that we are disrupting. The situation is already disrupted. It is unsustainable. And, I think in a very real sense, we see ourselves as making a kind of last ditch stand on behalf of students, ourselves, and higher education in the UK. So, so that's my kind of, how did we get here? This has been a long time coming, and we really, really need to turn things around. You know, ideally, you know, yes, we could all get back to normal, but we need a better normal, particularly in this sector. So, sorry, that was lengthy, but
no apologies necessary. No, thank you so much for outlining that. And yeah, so many themes covered there, especially in terms of casualisation. You know, 75k estimated academic staff are on casualised or kind of impermanent contracts, whatever, in the sector. And also it speaks a little bit, just thinking about you know, experiences, sessional experiences and others as well across the sector. That's a big problem in terms of issuing contracts and not being able to issue contracts before the work begins. It is endemic across the sector, and that is now accepted as being normal. And it's this kind of cultural gaslighting that happens in institutions that you know, people in powerful positions tell you that that's normal and that's to be accepted, when it's not just about deserving better, but we're yeah, as you say, we're working for free and without the promise of actually ever being paid or recognized for the labor that we are putting in. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really happy that you're fired up, because I also feel quite fired up too.
And I think that you made a really important point there about it being endemic, because one of the things that I think a lot of people are getting, and we're getting at my institution, you know, is management saying, well, you know, casualisation, workloads, you know, these are local issues, you know, and at a certain level, we do deal with them locally. But it's like you said, it's endemic. Actually, every time we want to change things, and I think this is true anywhere, the first thing they look at is sector averages, you know, or they point to a particular institution and they say, oh, well, just be glad you're not working there, because if you were working there, then you would have to deal with X. No university is going to, on its own, move out of the general standard of casualisation, move out of the general standards around workloads, fix the issues in inequality, unless we fix them across the sector. You know, there'll always be small scale variations, but we cannot deal with this one time. There's no vice chancellor in the country who is that committed, that principled, and that courageous. None of them are. You know, it simply will not happen at a single institution, and we know that.
Can I just step in here very briefly to say that I think this is a very important point. And on the issue of casualisation, what the latest round of negotiations between employers and unions seem to reveal is the unwillingness of employers to so much as acknowledge the presence and the scale of the issue of casualisation. And I think, you know, I'll be very brief here, but I think this is because casualisation does not happen by accident. It has become an absolutely central feature of the system itself. The system of marketised higher education cannot function without a reserve army of casualised workers. Unwillingness of employers to so much as acknowledge that is because they know that if you're changing, or if you're seriously and meaningfully addressing the problem of casualisation, you're changing the system itself, right? One doesn't go without the other. So, but it also speaks to the severity of the problem. We're in a position where employers will not even acknowledge the matter, let alone agree to a national framework to address the issue. So on the matter of pay gaps, we've seen some movement, some marginal acknowledgement of the issue, the beginning of an effort to address aspects of the problem. It's far too slow, and it's nowhere near should be, but at least there is some kind of mild acknowledgement of the issue. On casualisation, they won't even acknowledge the problem, because they know that if they start addressing the problem, then the whole system kind of collapses, and that they need that army of casualised workers for the system to continue and to perpetuate itself.
Thanks for this, because I think now what is coming out of both of your comments is that there is, so when I first heard about the USS strike and the 4-5 strike, and I was trying to figure out, well, how do we marry these two up? Like, because, you know, you're in between, everything is going on and you're doing your work, and you're reading the messages from UCU, and you're thinking, well, how does this work? So you've already provided sort of the hook that you were saying earlier about marketisation, and that the linking up, and as Tanya put together, like this is a whole scale the system is rotten to the core. So, and what are the key messages that we should be taking away from these two kind of campaigns?
But the linking of the two strikes as well, and you know, the fact that we're in two disputes, and I think a question that's quite legitimately often asked by casualized, low-paid junior staff, you know, why should we go out for USS? You know, because we know that the way that the system is set up at the moment, it's predominantly more senior, better paid, permanent academics who are in the pension scheme. And, you know, and being perfectly kind of honest, self-critical here, I think UCU needs to do better in its campaigning around USS on this question, because we should be just as outraged by the fact that junior staff, low-paid staff don't expect to have a pension, you know, as we are by the fact that the pension is being cut, you know. And if you actually think about the substantive issue, none of us, and, you know, younger people maybe don't think about it so much, none of us wants to work until we die. And if you're talking about not having an income post-retirement, that's what you're talking about. And one of the things that I think is important about the UCE proposals this time is that they want the employers to actually engage around this problem of lower paid, junior, casualized staff being shut out of the pension scheme. Because actually, the fact that we have gotten to a position where there's a huge sector of our workforce who we already know aren't in the scheme and who sometimes feel that the disputes of the scheme aren't about them, that is a problem. And that is something that we should be fighting against as well. And this is what I mean as well about this normalization. You know, we actually need to be pushing on some of the key demands around USS. The pension scheme needs to be expanded. You know, everyone working in higher education should be able to come into the pension scheme and feel that that's a worthwhile thing to do. You know, and that's something that, you know, I think UCU does give attention to in its negotiations and proposals. I think it's something we need to talk more to our members about, you know. So, you know, so it shouldn't be, you know, just USS doesn't affect me. That's another thing to be angry about. USS should affect everyone who works in a university. It is simply unfair and unsustainable that people are completely shut out of the pension scheme. So that's another thing that I feel, you know, extremely strongly about. Like, I don't think we can afford to accept employers' framings around this, you know. And I think that, you know, one thing that they do want as well, you know, is for us to kind of limit what's possible, but we can improve the scheme. Like, the scheme has been eroded over a series of cuts. It actually needs to be salvaged. So that wasn't a direct answer to your question, but I think, you know, I think that question, the core message, you know, it is that we haven't chosen this. You know, we have been pushed to the brink. You know, the theme of the Four Fights dispute, our slogan is "We're at breaking point." And if you talk to people working in higher education institutions, that is what they say, you know. And I think, yes, you know, if we could choose everything, if everything was under our control, you know, we would like to spend time just back in the classroom with our students having a nice time this term. But, you know, that's not the reality of where we're living, what we're living, you know, what is being done to us. And I think, you know, what is also being done to students through us. And the point, you know, that kind of you both make from being here is the difference between student and staff isn't as absolute as employers like to make it either. You know, the head of the student union at my university also works at the university as a UCU member as well. You know, many of our members, many of our really active members are also students. You know, many of us go back into study. Many students will work in universities at different points in time. You know, we are not two completely separate groups. We are a university community, you know. And that's both kind of direct in terms of that we are the same people often, you know, and indirect as in that kind of, you know, the working conditions and the learning conditions are the same.
Yeah, and that point's really important to make. Our working conditions are students' learning conditions. It's something that we often shout at the top of our voices whenever we are on strike. But yeah, I think maybe if we can speak about maybe the culture of division with that point that you made, Tanya, this idea that the university likes to have very strict binaries around this, that there are staff and that there are students and there is no kind of grey area. And yeah, the impact that, yeah, how during periods of industrial action leading up to them, how these kind of divisive rhetorics are played out to separate the student body from staff, and to those tactics of getting one to play against the other, which I think, it'd be great, Syahadah, to hear what you think about this and how this plays out, because I think students can see through that immediately.
Yeah, there's a lot to say here. Like, I want to say that I think over the pandemic, I think there's been a little bit more political education going on in the student movement and bringing people in and like getting messaging right. I think there are more people, more students. Sorry, my washing machine. There are more students who are in support of the strikes, and there's been, like in 2020 in March, a group of us at UCL did an occupation in solidarity with the strike. So, it's sad to say, but I think with more of the strikes, like, because it's been like so many years, I think more people are clued up now, which is a really sad thing to say, because like we should have won by now, that sort of thing. But yeah, you can really see the university try and strike break, which is awful. You can see the university trying to hire people, trying to get VLs to deliver lectures, and trying to reschedule lectures for missed content. Look, I don't want to bad name my other SU colleagues, but we just saw a motion that was rushed through at UCL SU. That was like, I don't even know how to say how the letter that came out of that rush motion looked like. It was something like, well, we support the strike, but no, please don't go on strike. We don't want this. And it was like, I guess the rot of the neoliberal institution, it spread. Like, they are successful in what they do, which is strike break. And it is the worst thing to see. But I think, like, aside from students' union, aside from like these sort of institutions within the institution, people on the ground are what makes up the strike and what makes up the strike solidarity as well. And I know people at UCL are trying to push for a referendum on that motion, to overturn that motion, which is great. But also, it is hard because I just saw in this group chat that somebody was at the UCL lecture theater, and they were standing outside trying to like get people to sign to do the referendum, and they were saying like people were arguing with them, and they were like, well, we've lost all this time, but like that's the thing, like you're not going to have a university anymore if we continue at this rate. You're not going to get anything. People are already complaining about like loss of learning over the previous year, and it's like, well, you're going to be losing a lot more if we continue like this. You're going to have no lecturers, you're going to have like no technical staff, you're going to have an empty university with a bad management system, and that is all it is, basically.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's important to highlight as well this kind of loss of education. Yeah, there has been a shift, obviously, during the pandemic to different modes of learning, and I appreciate, obviously, the various different challenges combined with COVID-19 that has brought about. But if we're thinking about loss in a broader sense, lecturers, academic staff, librarians, etc., have gone into this academic year exhausted. There's that in September, people have entered the new year feeling like they would do in December, or even worse than that. So I think it's about, I think you're right, it's about getting people. I'm so pleased that you are doing this collectively to kind of get students and all staff, right, to think about the long term, and to think about what we will be losing out on if this continues, if the unsustainable working conditions continue, and learning conditions too. Sorry.
It's like, I was trying to say to like people at Goldsmiths, because they're facing 52 job cuts, it's like, you're gonna lose learning now. Like, sure, you will have less lectures or whatever, your lecturers overwork and they can't provide the learning that you want. But also, like, with these cuts, like, you are literally gonna lose people in your university. You will lose technical skills, you'll lose knowledge, and you'll lose the perspectives that they bring in. Like, it's a big loss. And everyone, you'll hear from students who are like, I love this lecture, they're really great. I'm just like, well, think about what if they got cut out from their job next year. And like, this is all these are all like measures we put in place, like striking and like negotiations. And a strike is like the last ditch attempt. Like this is our last ditch attempt to prevent this from happening. So like there is basically no reason not to be in support of the strike.
For sure.
Could I follow up on something else that Syahadah said that I think is really important? That we do sometimes act as though this is kind of, lecturers and students, this is what this is about. But there are a lot more people who work in the university. UCU, isn't just an academics union. It has many academic related professional and support staff. There are many other academic related professional and support staff, who are in other unions like Unison and Unite. Both Unison and Unite are balloting at different campuses around the country this year because they're facing, similar conditions. Syahadah mentioned Goldsmiths. One of the things that's happening at Goldsmiths is the complete gutting of school and department-based professional support staff. That is going to have huge impacts on students, as well as impacts on people's workloads. And, when we talk about people's experience of working in the university in the past year, the experience of, professional support, academic related stuff is really very similar to academic staff. They are exhausted, they are overworked and under-supported as well. And there's really direct things too. I mean, at lots of institutions, students, it's very difficult for students to access counseling services because they're understaffed and underfunded, then, and it has kind of flow-ons. Then professional and supports and academic staff in departments end up spending increasing amount of time trying to fill those gaps and do individual one-on-one support for students in crisis. That then impacts on the amount of time that we're teaching, and generally that means more and more for us working beyond our paid hours, doing things that we're not actually kind of, skilled to do in the same way as people who are explicitly hired for that. And all of it does create, and this is the kind of irony of the neoliberal university. Students are supposed to be customers receiving this product, but the neoliberalization hollows out the product itself. The product has gotten, the product has turned into crap in many ways because of what has been done in the name of serving kind of students as consumers.
I think it's absolutely, if I may, absolutely essential what Tanya has just said, the fact that the rot of neoliberalization, as Syahadah said earlier, which I think is a very nice way to put it, is really spreading. And it's not just degrading people's lives, which clearly it is. It's not just degrading our pay. It's not just degrading our pensions. It's not just degrading our working conditions. It's not just degrading my sleep. To be honest, one of the things that keep me awake at night, and I mean this very seriously, is not just catastrophic climate change. It's not just the future of my children, definitely that. It's the number of things that are constantly at the back of my mind that I know I should be doing for my students. Yeah. And that I simply do not, there's just not enough time in a day, in a week, in a month to do them. And, if I start thinking about the number of things that I should have done and that I've done in a half-baked way, because that's, I only had 10 minutes where I should have spent an hour, or I only had an hour where I should have spent half a day. That really keeps me up at night and makes me extremely anxious and unhappy. And so it's not just degrading people, it's also, degrading education fundamentally. We don't have the time to educate our students, and professional support staff don't have the time to support students the way that students should be supported. And marketisation also has fundamentally poisoned the relationship among staff and between staff and students, something that should be all about care, support, education, mutual emancipation, collective building, has become something really crap that is completely atomized, that is based on providing a service, providing value for money. And, that makes me extremely happy. I've had a very brief stint in the private sector before doing my PhD and deciding on the career in academia. And for some odd reasons, I was really good at it. And so good that I was offered a golden contract to become a regional manager for a crap private firm in France selling newspaper subscriptions in schools and universities. I said no to that, and I end up exactly where I was 20 years ago, where I'm being asked to market my courses, to attract more students, to expand and to grow the income of my school and my university. And I end up selling degrees, or I'm being asked to sell degrees in the same way that I was being asked 20 years ago to sell those newspapers subscription when I was working in the private sector. That makes me very, very depressed and unhappy. So yeah, it has really rotten education and severely degraded education. And I think part of our role as union reps is really, especially on the picket line, as we're having those discussions with students, is really try to draw those connections between, the degrading of our lives and our working conditions and the degrading of education, and also draw those connections between the various strands of those disputes: pay, pensions, casualisation, inequality, back to the central issue, which is marketisation, the introduction of tuition fees, and the fact that 70% plus of university income today comes from student paying fees, where before you had those government grants, you had a set number of students, you turn to the government, hi, I need so much money to educate them and conduct research, and that's the money you were given. And there was a cap on student numbers that gave the system a relative amount of stability and predictability. All of that obviously has now come through the window.
Yeah, I think just to come in on what you were saying before, I think it's really important to highlight this gap that the neoliberal institution kind of gives us. So in one of our earlier interviews with the Care Collective, as part of this kind of series, in their book, they talk about caring with, for, and about one another. And essentially what the neoliberal institution is doing, as you've all highlighted, is preventing us from doing any of those things. Because as you say, like Mario, you go to sleep or go to bed thinking, oh, I haven't done even sometimes the basic things that we all need to do to care for our students and for our colleagues, and you're worrying about it, and it's causing mental health, severe mental health impacts, right, on staff, but also on students too, who don't necessarily receive the same support, especially during COVID-19, which has magnified existing inequalities across the board, but has made different living situations almost unlivable, right? So yeah, I think it's really important to tease that out, how the institution is actively, they call it, they're actively kind of enforcing this mode of carelessness, which is kind of, yeah, there's a sense of banality. Like they use Hannah Arendt to kind of talk about this banality of carelessness at every single level. And that's what we're being conditioned, Tanya, as you said before, to kind of accept as being normal, when we're all just sat there most of the time in meetings or after things happen going, is it just me, or is this really fucked up? Because it feels like it is. And fortunately you have colleagues to reassure you that no, it is. But yeah.
And I think that's really important about COVID-19, because I think it's showed how degraded and messed up the university sector is at the moment, and also the hypocrisy of vice chancellors now kind of being like, why won't the staff think about the students, when it became quite clear in COVID-19 how, university management felt about students, fencing them into student halls so they wouldn't lose their rental income, bringing classes, there was a lot of conflict, obviously, and a lot of pushback from students around online education last year and questions around that. And the reality is that the way that online education was rolled out, a lot of the difficulties and a lot of the problems for students were to do with the things that we're talking about. The reliance on casualized staff who simply aren't paid and weren't paid to do the amount of work that it would take to take a course, from in-person to online teaching. The fact of the unsustainable workloads given to academic staff, and they're just told to figure it out and do this on top of everything else that they're doing as well, and the fact that, I think for, many students, as we move forward, certain forms of blended education, in various ways, would work really well for students and academics, but they have to be funded Staff have to be resourced, they have to be trained, they have to be equipped to deliver them well, you know, because the thing is, for many of us, you know, if you've been doing teaching for a long time, you can kind of, you know, you can smooth over the edges. You know, as Mario said, you don't feel good about it, but you can prepare a lecture that ideally you would spend 2 days on in half a day, you know, drawing on what you've done before, what you already know. You know, if you're doing something new, and this was for many staff for the first time, you know, turning that into online, you couldn't smooth over those edges anymore. And that was about the conditions under which we work under, you know, and we see it now in terms of kind of the lack of caps and recruitment, where institutions see students simply as fees. So we're in a situation this year where, you know, you have some institutions that have doubled their student numbers and are now teaching like hundreds of students in demountables, you know, and hiring like a couple more casual staff to do it. You know, other institutions that have lost students that are basically just desperately trying to get them through the door. And it's really the fees, the pound signs in front of their names, you know, and then, you know, seeing staff as, you know, an item line in the budget that they can try and reduce their costs on. And that doesn't serve anyone. And it's not actually the way that staff and students in the university relate to each other. You know, not academic staff, not professional and support staff, not staff in the library, not security staff. You know, we try still to relate to each other as human beings, but, you know, it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. And that's the degradation that Mario was talking about, the degradation of ourselves as people as well. So, you know, I'm not surprised when you see students being so angry. And it's so easy to direct that anger to the most obvious person standing in front of you in the classroom, you know, to the person who doesn't show up to their lecture because they're on strike over casualisation and pay and pensions. But that doesn't mean it's the right person, you know.
Can I jump here? I think this is really an important, very, very important point, as we hopefully, as many of us as possible, will be on the picket line trying to save the soul of the university. We know what's going to happen, right? We know that the conservative press is going to come down hard on us, and that senior management will be asking questions as to why we would do this to our students that they care so much about. And so I think it's very important, before we agree to answer that question, why are you doing this? Have you thought about the interest of your students? I think we should all collectively say, I will respond to your question, but I take issue with you asking workers to answer for the behavior and the decisions of employers. And that should always be the premise of our reply. I will respond to you. I have things to say about the welfare of students and the impact that the strikes will have. But as a rule, we should always start off by saying, you're asking the wrong person. We, workers and employees, should not have to answer for the behavior and the decisions and the mess created by others. So yeah, I just think kind of mental gymnastic, getting into the habit of always saying this, because we know we will be blamed for the mess that others have created. And I think we shouldn't feel bad about firmly saying, we have not created this mess. We'll talk to you. But you know, we shouldn't have to respond for those problems. Another thing I wanted to say as well is just going back to something we were discussing earlier, the relationship among, you know, sort of casualized staff and staff on more secure contracts. I often find myself telling colleagues that are in secure positions of that, you know, they need to wake up to the fact that the creeping casualization across the sector is impacting all of us in very, very real ways. So it's not just that we need to act out of solidarity, which clearly we need to. And that needs to be the first impulse, is to act out of solidarity with our colleagues who are on precarious contracts. But we are all becoming more casualized as a result. I mean, and insecure in our positions as a result. All of us, even people, you know, with years of experience on what we would traditionally consider to be very secure contracts. You know, the mess that is the neoliberal university means that, you know, we've got waves after waves after waves of redundancies in very large universities that you would think, you know, are financially healthy and stable and therefore not in need of making people redundant. It's happening up and down the country to people on secure contracts who are very senior in their roles and are being made redundant from one day practically to the next. The other way in which we are all becoming collectively more insecure in our employment is obviously the more casualized the sector become, the less able we are to collectively take action against those nefarious policies that are being implemented. Not just because our casualized staff very often will not be in a position that they can just voice their concerns and take action. They'll be too vulnerable to. Another thing we haven't really talked about is the incredibly toxic managerial culture in the neoliberal university. So it's not just that casual staff themselves will not be in a position to stand up, voice their concerns and take action against those nefarious policies, is that we all collectively also at the same time internalize that, you know, there's an army of people on those insecure contracts. We shouldn't complain. We are the lucky ones. I say that all of the time. You know, I count among the lucky ones. I was promoted. I make a decent living, and I am on a quote unquote secure contract. You know, and I think collectively as a sector we've internalized this, and a lot of people on insecure contract will just noise. They won't, you know, put up a fight because there are people who are so much worse off than they are. So, and that obviously means also that again, it's kind of an open door for senior management to then be rolling over those very toxic policies. So I think, yeah, we are all collectively more insecure as a result of casualization, which is an added reason. It shouldn't be the primary reason, but it's an added reason to stand in solidarity and tackle the scourge of casualization.
Yeah,
if it makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, I think it's a really it's a really important point. You know, I think that there can be an understandable kind of sense, you know, yes, things are bad, but I don't have it so bad. So, you know, don't make waves. You know, things are not so bad for me. But, you know, I think Mario's point is really important. Actually, when redundancies start getting rolled out, they get rolled out first against professors, because when the university sees you as a, you know, a cost item in the budget, it's the most expensive cost items that they want to get rid of. Mm-hmm. You know, so when universities go down this track, they want to replace professors with casualized, precarious, you know, junior staff. And there's, you know, and that's a simple cost thing. It's also because, you know, they figure those staff will feel, you know, lucky to have a job, you know, lucky to get a job next term. You know, the more secure people feel, the more they're able to do. But definitely, I think in a lot of institutions in this strike, and a lot of institutions are in local dispute as well. You know, Syahadah mentioned goldsmiths. I was talking to one of our national negotiators, you know, and he said he feels like, he's from Sheffield, they're in local dispute. He said he feels like half of the universities are also in local dispute. And I think there's a real temptation, and other institutions like mine, which aren't in dispute, you know, are being told all the time, we're in a financially precarious position. You know, be careful, because if you do this, this is going to impact back on you, because you're going to damage the finances of the institution. And it's very tempting to think, okay, it's too much. You know, the best thing to do is, you know, ride it out. You know, don't make waves, got to batten down the hatches, we'll be okay. But you won't. You know, the deluge is coming, the waters are rising, you know, and the only way to make ourselves more secure is to turn this around. You know, casualization, as Mario said, it affects all of us. No one has a secure job in a heavily casualized industry. That's, you know, the only way we make our own jobs more secure is by making the jobs of our colleagues more secure. And, you know, we should also be opposed to the degradation of the institution of the university that casualization represents, what it does to our students, what it does to junior colleagues, you know. But at a certain level, we also need to say, okay, you know, enlightened self-interest, as some people describe solidarity, is actually very much the case here. You know, your job is not getting safer the less you do. The less you do, the more precarious your job is getting, no matter, you know, where you sit in the university.
That's really, you just put it to the point about why we need to get the vote out, why we need to vote for industrial action, and why we need to campaign. So how do you feel about, so we wanted to bring in the emotional side of this. How do you feel about going into industrial action after the year and a half that we've had? And also for the students, how do you think the students feel about this after the year and a half that they've had of really lockdown, isolation, and pandemic?
You know what? I tell students, it's like, so you missed being around people, right? You know, the safest place to be around people is outside your university on the picket line, seeing people, pouring out tea, eating donuts, talking about something that you're not going to be graded on. It's like, just really like the way I want to promote a club night. It's just like, oh, come on, just come out. Like, and you can leave anytime, you can come late. Like, come on. Like, don't tell me that this is worse, or like, don't tell me you hate it and like you rather would sit in a lecture by an overworked lecturer with notes that were prepared like a day before because they had absolutely no time. It's like, come on. Like, we all love Little Picket, and like, if you're clinically vulnerable, we've got online pickets, and they are run much better than online lectures because it's not on Blackboard Collaborate, which is really messed up because the university doesn't want to put money into the online infrastructure. So like, oh, come on. And the teacher will teach you more. And standing out there talking to your lecturers, you will learn more than you do in a classroom with an agenda set by a neoliberal institution. And we know this a lot at art school, at Uni of the Arts London and other art schools. It's like, when you graduate, you're going to be like in a horrible position. Nobody wants to hire an artist. And a lot of my friends, guess what? We all graduated art school, and lots of people are going back to teach at art schools. It's like, well, this is just the reality of the situation. If you're not going to be a casualized worker at an art school, you're going to be a casualized architect at an architecture firm, or you're going to try to like live off some sort of funding that, like, you know, you are going to be a casualized worker in the very end. And, you know, it's what they say, it's like an injury to one is an injury to all. Like, oh, come on. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's about showing up at this moment. I think it's about emphasizing as well the fact that the industrial action, we can apply pressure as a student body to support our staff, and it is effective. It works. Applying pressure on management, those who are not budging and not willing to negotiate or you know, kind of pay whatever to negotiation. I think, yeah, it's about getting students to show up at this moment. It's an inconvenience, of course it is, but that's the whole point. This is also, as someone said earlier, this is literally the last chance saloon type situation. We wouldn't be doing this if we had not tried everything else, which is what has happened already. And COVID-19 as well has, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, it's exacerbated inequalities, but it's also brought, you know, considerations to the front of the mind, like, what do I actually want from my work, my life, personal, public? And I think it's also given people space to think about that and to reconsider those things. So yeah, I appreciate though as well, you know, this is also going to bring particular pressures for the student body in terms of accessing, you know, lecturers or academic staff in all forms during this period, which will make it difficult, especially after the period where we've been you know, in physical isolation from one another. But again, it's not out of choice at this point. We are, as Tanya's highlighted, we're at breaking point.
And we are accessible during the strike. In fact, in many ways, more so than in.
Well, yeah.
Picket line. Just on the picket line. Yeah.
You know, if and when strike happens, I can tell confidently to my students, you know where to find me for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'll be on the picket line. And more simply, and going back to what Syahadah was saying earlier, you know, the picket line is, and I mean this meaningfully and genuinely, a site of education and learning, right? And how many times have, you know, former students of mine told me, certainly after the last wave of industrial action, you know, it's been really great talking to you. I've learned so much. And you know, on the picket line, we all collectively, not just students, learn about industrial relations, about the history of the university, about the purpose of the university. You learn about, you know, trade union laws in this country being some of the most restrictive in the Western world. You know, you generally learn a lot through, you know, one-to-one conversations or the teach outs that we organize during the strike. So one of the things that I tend to say when you say, well, have you thought about the impact on students? Well, yeah, we've kind of thought about it, first of all, because that's what we do day in, day out. And secondly, we don't stop educating when we take industrial action. Industrial action is really, in fact, it's a privileged time for a different type of education, perhaps not about the subjects that you're studying and, you know, and for which you're taking a degree, but you will genuinely learn a lot that you otherwise wouldn't have learned. And we'd all collectively learn a lot that we otherwise wouldn't have learned. So education doesn't stop with industrial action. It continues in different places, in different ways, but these are sites of learning and education. And I'd say, you know, really rich, meaningful at that learning and education. And yeah, in a way that, you know, the agenda is not set, as Syahadah said earlier, by the neoliberal university.
Yeah,
I think no, go ahead.
I think I have something to say. I know some colleagues are a bit wary of going on strike because they're like, oh, but my students and things like that. I want to say to them, like, you have the responsibility as an educator not only to check your learning outcomes, but also to teach your students about how it's like to work in a bad workplace. And you have a responsibility to make sure that they know what that looks like and they know what they can do to resist that. Because I think as an educator, you also don't want your students to be in that sort of environment, whether they become educators themselves or whether they, you know, work elsewhere. Like, it is a genuine life skill that then this is a way you can impart it to them, honestly.
No, Syahadah, you're so right. This is so important to also say that we need to stand up and speak up if we feel that this is wrong. And, you know, and that's also being part of a role model, and to show that, especially in this country where collective action has been eroded over, I know, since the 1980s through these kind of neoliberal agendas, is to really show that together we can be strong. And it sounds so, it sounds so corny, but it's true. The 2018 industrial action, it really, there was this real feeling of collectivity and unity. And I think if we can tap back into that and to show that it's important to stand up for your employment rights, because as Mario said, they're not that great. And you know, and in our institution, we've had 3 years of voluntary severance schemes. I mean, our union has been decimated of, you know, the old school of real kind of comrades with lots of experience. And it's really quite scary if Mario and I are the seasoned, experienced old hands at this. You know, that's scary because we've said goodbye to so many who've had so much experience. So yeah, I think it's really heartening to hear you say this, Syahadah, because you've bring such a positive spin on this. And it's really uplifting. It's making me feel hopeful. That I wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, we're having the same thing at RCA, that our really seasoned UCU organizers have moved on to other universities, and people who are left are like, well, I'm not gonna be as good at them. And like, we have to just remind each other, like, you know the most, basically, like, you know as much as you need to, and we're all going to learn together. We learn from other branches, we learn from other movements, we learn from other sectors of the industry. Like, it's just how it is, and we will all learn together. We're in a university.
Great.
I think it is important to speak to, you know, the really complicated emotions as well, because, you know, many branches, as I said, are in dispute. You know, many branches that aren't in dispute. Birkbeck has an open voluntary redundancy scheme as well. You know, that we can't tell people they put nothing on the line. you know, when they take industrial action and when they vote for industrial action. I don't think that's what anyone's doing, but the things that people feel, you know, you're talking about, you know, being role models for our students. I think that's also important, but we're also, you know, ourselves vulnerable people in need of care who have been really ground down. You know, we've been ground down over years and years. And, you know, you mentioned the 2018 strikes. And I think for many people, they were, in terms of emotions, just an amazing experience in that way, because, you know, it was a relief and it was an ability. And when, you know, you came back, I remember walking back into work after the last kind of big tranche of days that we took off. And you kind of felt like we should all be marching in step, singing the Internationale. But, you know, you felt brave. And that's the thing, you know, you felt like we had power. You felt like turning around and saying, actually, I'm not going to work 70-hour weeks anymore. You know, actually, if my manager asks me to do something with 2 hours notice, I'm not going to do it, you know. And I think that's really important, because, you know, right now, I think there are a lot of people thinking about returning their ballots. They know things are wrong, you know, but they're also scared. Yeah. You know, they're scared of the implications in the immediate term. They are scared of, you know, what happens if, you know, there's more instability in their institution. They're scared about being individually targeted. You know, they're scared, if they're casualized staff, about not being employed. They also, you know, have a sense of, and this is what the employers try and tell us, you know, we talk about, you know, we've been on these strikes before, we're still going, you know, people feel exhausted, they feel frustrated. And I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one thing I would say is we've talked a lot about the gradual kind of degradation of higher education. And if you look, I mean, at the USS dispute, for an example, we could have lost that pension in 2018. We didn't. We could have lost that pension a couple of years ago. I mean, at the moment, standing still is not that bad an outcome. It's a victory of sorts. It's not a complete victory. But, you know, the thing is, I think in terms of emotions, you know, I feel stressed about it. I feel under pressure. I think, I mean, I'm not sure at a lot of institutions. At our institution, definitely, our employer is putting the branch under more pressure. They're putting me under more pressure as the chair. They're putting individual members under more pressure. And that pressure is real, because this is our livelihood and our jobs, you know, and I don't think anyone takes in votes for industrial action without a whole kind of complicated mix of emotions. And fear is one of them. And I think we do need to, I don't know, we need to acknowledge that and acknowledge there's nothing wrong with it. Like, it makes sense. It's sensible. But the question is, I think some of the things that Syahadah and other people were talking about, you know, where do we go with that? You know, because, you know, it's like I was saying before, you know, the more decisions in our workplace we make out of fear, you know, the more we're going to continue to do that. You know, the worse it's going to get, and the worse our subjective experience of the institution is going to get. We need to be deciding on whether or not we return our ballots, on whether we think we need to take action on these issues, you know, and we need to try then to work through the fear and emotion we have around that, the worry for students, the worry for ourselves. If we're only deciding on the basis of those worries and fears, you know, then our workplace, our existence as workers is going to continue to get worse. And it is scary and it is stressful, you know, and even just today, I can see things popping into my kind of WhatsApp and my email because my employer is sending more messages telling staff not to go on strike, you know, and it's worrying, you know, and it affects us. And I think we can't pretend it doesn't, but it's again, what Mario said, they don't have to be doing this. They could be coming back into the room with us, and where they're putting their energies and their priorities is actually trying to make us scared. That is what they're doing, and that is how they're choosing to respond to us at the moment.
Yeah, they are choosing to go low. I think it's really important as well that you've picked up on this complexity of emotion as well, Tanya, because, you know, I'm a PhD student. I'm also a sessional tutor working in a different institution as well. You know, I have friends who are PhD students who have been doing their PhDs in the pandemic, who are obviously employed on casualized contracts, and there is a lot of genuine fear in terms of pay, but in terms of you know, the way that they're being treated, that the way that they're living, not just their work lives, but their personal lives, obviously, because the work comes into the personal every single time. And I think, yeah, it's really important that you highlight there that we're not just returning our ballots on the basis of the individual self. We are also thinking about how in the future, HE as it stands is, I mean, it's just not sustainable, the way that people are working, the way people are learning. And yeah, to think in broader terms about that, although that is very, very difficult because we are so programmed into thinking about the individual. I think every time, I think it's a really important reminder, actually, because we are so driven to be thinking about the self, especially working in HE in the UK. So thank you for that. Okay, so if we move on then to material steps, and then we can kind of recap. So we were just wanting to think about what material steps colleagues and students can take respectively or together to apply pressure to either alleviate the need for industrial action, and also maybe some actions our employers can take. And also thinking about showing solidarity. So what concrete actions have we taken in the past and also have been effective, and what kind of things do we want to do in the future? Because there's a lot of dancing, there's a lot of singing, making songs out of, you know, lyrics related to the ongoing various disputes. But yeah, what can we do before that, before it gets to the crunch stage of actually being on strike? So if I start with Syahadah, maybe on this one, what kind of things do students do or have been doing so far to apply that pressure or mobilize?
Just for like, I speak for the RCA strikes because that's the recent one. We've been telling people, like, if you're sad, you can't go to your ceramics class, please write to senior management, because if you want to stop the strike, they can stop the strike. They can give all the demands that we actually want. And yeah, that's it. The strike, the strike will be over. So we've been telling students, like, just across all universities, like, tell your senior management that you're unhappy. You know they treat you as a consumer. Well, what happens when Amazon doesn't deliver your parcel? You complain to them. So yeah, go complain to like your vice chancellor, your provost, your director. Tell them they're in the wrong. They caused this. They caused you all this harm. And tell them you want your lecturers to be treated well. You want the tech staff to be treated well and things like that. In terms of other actions in the past, we've done occupations. We might do them again. I don't know. I did not order any camping tents. No, that was not me. But also, yeah, I mean, it is nice to, like, you go to the pickets if you can, help out with the pickets, put yourself on the rota, bring things for the pickets. Everyone needs water, plastic cups, some sort of hot food or some sort of easy to eat food, and hand warmers. People need that a lot. So like, bring that to the picket and participate in the teach outs and join the student organizing coalitions that are happening at the moment. There's Red Square movement. Like, you will bump into one of them on social media and you will message one of them and they will put you somewhere where you can help out the strikes. Like, the entire student movement, I mean, we're lucky for the last academic year, we've been like really connected. So like, get in touch, like actually join the organizing, because it's one thing to be like, wow, this is so inspirational, but like, actually put labor where your mouth is and like actually come and help us out, because that is what, like, that's what helps the movement the most.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Do the work. Yeah, so I think that's a good message to take for student unions maybe who aren't as active as your union, because there are a lot of them for various different reasons, or sometimes as well to do with the pressure that management applies in these kind of cultures as well. And so I think that's a really good point, doing the work. Start, the best way to start this is to start. Yeah. So yeah, what about you and Tanya and Mario? What do you kind of think about, yeah, material steps forward? What can we do? Give us some go-to steps.
Well, I think it is important the way that you framed this question, because even though things feel like they're rocketing along, industrial action is not inevitable at the moment. You know, all in both disputes, essentially, what UCU is asking for is for employers to seriously rejoin us in the room. And, you know, in the case of the USS dispute, what that means is withdrawing the cuts that are currently have been passed and will come in if nothing else happens next April, So we are asking them to withdraw those cuts so we can actually negotiate with them again and come up with a better solution. On pay, casualisation, equalities, and workload, they walked out of the room in the summer, and they've refused to walk back in it again. Come back to us, talk to us, negotiate seriously, and we will not go on strike. I mean, those are the demands that we are making. It doesn't mean we will never go on strike. It doesn't mean that the negotiations couldn't break down. But if they're saying now is not the time, it's very easy for now not to be the time. And so I think there, one of the things that some of the central UCU campaigns people say is, sometimes we kind of imagine university managements almost as these big kind of sinister Machiavellian figures, but actually it makes more sense to think of them as kind of lazy people who want an easy life and to not spend very much money, and at the moment they feel like the easiest way for them to kind of, do what they want to do is just to steamroller over us. So basically what we are trying to do is make them think, and rationally, that the easiest thing to do to have an easy life is to come back into the room with us. And so if you think about it that way, I think there are lots of things to be done. I mean, one of the things that we come up against is the relationship of individual employers to the two confederations. So we haven't mentioned this explicitly, I don't think, but we're going on strike nationally because we bargain over these issues nationally. So in one situation where in dispute the pensions against Universities UK, UUK, which is a confederation of employers, mainly the pre-92 universities that are in the USS pension scheme. In the pay, casualisation, equalities and workload dispute, we're with UCEA, which I think is the Universities and College Education Association. I might have got the E wrong, but that's a wider conglomeration of employers that also includes the post-92s. So the way they both work is that the employers come together and essentially agree a position, or a position gets pushed through by the kind of biggest, most influential universities, whichever way. So we can put pressure at a local level on our institutions to release the statements that they've made to UK and UCEA publicly. And because different universities take different tactics. Our administration, for instance, like to tell us that, within the room, they play a very progressive role, but they won't share their communications with the employers' federations with us, and they won't make a clear public statement. So some universities like Oxford and Cambridge around USS made joint statements with their UCU branches, in the last 12 months. So putting pressure on employers actually, and we've been talking about framing, asking them, what are you doing? You say that you don't want this dispute to happen. Prove it. What are you doing inside UUK? What are you doing inside UCEA? Make a public statement calling on UCEA or UUK to return to the negotiating table. I come from a small institution. They say they have no influence. I mean, RCA would be the same. It doesn't matter. Every little bit of influence, puts pressure and changes the narrative. So I think, they want to say there's nothing they can do. There's always something they can do. If they want to try to tell staff not to go on strike because they're so kind of nice, as my employer does, prove it, come to the table, do something to support us. And I think both students and staff can do that. So I think we can put pressure at an individual level. And the reality is, if enough institutions actually went back to those central organizing bodies and said, we don't want to go down this path, we wouldn't be going down this path. Then I think the things that Syahadah said about if it comes to actual industrial action are really important. With us, with staff, one of the things to say is, we vote, then we go on strike. If we have a positive vote, if we can't pull this off, think about the ways you can contribute, come down to the picket once a week, even, think if you can help to organize a teach out. It doesn't have to be this kind of huge, heroic model. There are loads of ways that we can do things to put pressure beforehand, and loads of ways to support the actions once we take them, if we have to.
Yeah, it's really important. It's a really good takeaway message as well. We spoke with Alison Phipps a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, it's about getting away from those kind of capitalist notions that you need a big grand thing to come in and save everything, and they have to be plans that are already ready made, ready baked, ready to go. It's about kind of taking smaller things on so they're more manageable, and creating, well, contributing to that movement. I think that's a really, really important point, because burnout and feeling quite overwhelmed as well are also very normal kind of parts of industrial action as well. Mario, do you want to?
Yeah, just quickly. So to follow up on some of the things that have been said, and then add a couple of more ideas. The pressure on VCs is absolutely essential. I mean, at our institution, the position of the VC when we last met with him to discuss the USS dispute was: we've got national processes, we've got national negotiators. They tell us that, and we have no reason to think otherwise. So they are entirely deferral to what those bodies are saying, but they're saying that on their behalf. So the truth of the matter is that you've got, a dozen very influential vice chancellors. They're the ones who kind of are going to be shaping the position of those bodies, and they have that power because a lot of the other vice chancellors are just completely kind of passive, silent, and kind of deferring to whatever is being negotiated at the national level. The truth of the matter is, the more of these kind of more apathetic vice chancellors start speaking up, the more those representative bodies will be inclined to change their position. So there's a lot that's happening by default, is what I'm trying to say, by default of courage of those vice chancellors to speak up and engage with the process, and kind of realize that those bodies are representing them. That if enough of them tell them and mandate them differently, then that will completely alter the dynamic of the dispute. So yeah, definitely putting pressure on vice chancellors that are kind of sitting on the sideline to get involved and start speaking up. And there's various things that you can do to achieve that. Then, if you're a member of staff, if you're a member of the union, vote, 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 vote. Whatever your intentions are, whether you're in a position to, willing or able to take industrial action, as Tanya said earlier, the more branches pass the threshold, the less likely industrial action actually become. And I know it's counterintuitive, but that's what I keep repeating, colleagues. Give our negotiators a, more leverage and a stronger hand in the room, and you'll see that we might actually be able to avoid industrial action. So the bigger the mandates, the less likely industrial action actually becomes. So if you are being consulted and balloted, vote, vote, vote. Always remind people that abstention is a kind of double negative vote, right? You're not just choosing not to support industrial action yourself, you're actually making it that bit harder for others who are in a position to take action to take it. And always remind people that the industrial action is a right. It's a legally protected right. We have the right to take industrial action. Now, of course, anti-union legislation is making the exercise of that right difficult, but don't play in the hands of the Tories, right? They've given you that power to make the life of the militant activist trade unionists to take industrial action. Don't help them. Yeah, so don't abstain. Vote. If you're not a unionized member, join a union. Obviously, we the stronger, the more we are, the stronger we are. So join a union. If you don't want to join a union, don't scab. It's a practical step. I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, thinking about the actual strike. But always remind people not to scab. It's a good practical step they can take in order to support us. But more seriously, I'm thinking here about the mass of people who, for a range of different reasons, are not able to be on the front line, are not perhaps able to take industrial action. There's really a wide range of things you can do. Educate students. Educate students about what's happening. You don't have to take industrial action to tell people about, the severely degraded conditions in the neoliberal university. You're a victim of it, so you know about it firsthand. Educate students, so that in turn, students who are educated can educate their peers. We know that a lot of students will kind of have a knee-jerk reaction if industrial action is announced. A lot of people will go for, that's not what I'm paying for. A lot of students will go for, you've been off for those past 18 months, off work, and now you refuse to go back to work and you take industrial action to protect your gold-plated pensions. There's a lot of education that needs to happen out there. And our students can be our, very, very, very important allies in educating their peers and their fellow students. So yeah, talk to us, educate yourself, educate others, help with the campaigning, help with the plastering, with putting up posters. There's a lot you can do in the background. You don't have to be seen, but that will make a world of difference to us who are on the front line.
I know we're going for a long time, but I wanted to come in quickly to really echo what Mario said about the ballot itself, that I think it's important. We've kind of talked a lot about framing, those kinds of things. And the ballot at one level is about us deciding as a union to take industrial action. But it's also, as Mario said, it's a very important symbol of where we're at as a union. When those ballot results come in, every single employer is going to immediately look at them. They're going to immediately look at how well the union did overall. They're going to look at their own institution. And the actions that they take in the next year or so, not only about these disputes, but about how they go forward around their own cost-saving measures, around things like VSER, are going to be impacted by how many members of UCU voted in that ballot at their institution. Because the vote at some level, and this is one of the things about the vote, and why we could talk for a long time about the trade union legislation and kind of how insidious it is. But the vote at some level is us having to put our cards on the table, because everyone can see how many people voted at every single institution and across the country, And so, and I think that's important. As Mario said, it is far more likely that the employers will walk back into those negotiating rooms. And essentially, I think, this is a prediction, and hopefully I'll get to see it come true. If every single institution that was balloted in these ballots got over the threshold, I think we would be back in negotiations the next day. That's the way these things work. It's, it's a war of position as much as anything else, and the ballot does something very important, and I think, people do need to think, and I was talking about that fear before as well, like the employers have pushed these changes through. They're not talking to us because they think they can get away with it, and the simple and kind of quite brutal logic that they've taken is we're too tired, we're too scared, COVID's been too hard, we're too worried about our students. They think that we won't respond because of what we've been through. And if you think about it that way, that is how they are currently treating us. They are hoping essentially that we have been so ground down that we will not respond to this. And that's the bet that they've taken. And that is what our ballot is a response to. And I just think it's so important to think about what our ballot is going to say to us and to our employers.
I think this is a really good point to end on. This is really, it summarizes it all. You've given us all the reasons why we need to get the vote out and why we need to vote yes.
For staff and for students, right? This is all about getting involved, building your union, make your union what you want it to be, get involved in whatever work is needed, and also think about the creative ways that you can contribute. I think it's really beautiful when people do that. There's a lot of invisible work, I should say, going on behind the scenes in terms of legal work, administrative work, marketing, comms, right? All these different things that are being done behind the scenes that we don't get to see, but people are working flat out for this because, as Tanya said, with basically our employers, UK, etc. They're trying to mug us off, and they're not going to. So thank you very much for a very hopeful conversation.
Yes, thank you for coming and joining us.
Well, thanks for organizing it. It was really, really nice.
Yes, thank you so much.